I'm Pastor Brandon Koble. I'm a pastor in Milwaukee, pastoring two churches, one in West Dallas, Trinity Lutheran Church, and dual parish 1.1 miles away. And it's called Oklahoma Avenue Lutheran Church, a very original name. Oddly enough, it's on Oklahoma Avenue in Milwaukee. For the last almost 4 years, I've been working on starting a classical school, which we'll talk about the different iterations of that planning, but is now going to be a classical high school, of which I'm stepping over to headmaster. So I'll be pastoring a bit, but we called another pastor to take care of most of the pastoral duties for the two churches, and then I'll be headmastering our school. Just one quick note. One, thank you all for sticking around for the last session on the last day of the conference. When I saw that I was the last session of the last day on the conference, I went from delivering a kind of academic paper to retooling the whole thing so that we could have more conversation. Because many of you are probably here because either A, you want to start a school, you're in the midst of starting a school, or you have a grade school and you want to eventually start a high school. That means we need to talk a little bit. So at any time throughout the course of the presentation, if you have a question, let me know. Pastors at the seminary, when we preach, we're taught to give very specific examples when we're talking about things, and people connect the dots. They'll apply them to their own individual situations. So my hope for us this morning, as I talk about kind of our narrative, what I've been going through the last 4 years, that you will hit on certain things that, while it may not exactly apply to your situation, will be close enough to say, hey, maybe this will help me out, or give me some questions to ask in the future, or things to think about, so that maybe you don't have to trip and fall as many times as I have done in the last 4 years while trying to start this. Milwaukee, if you don't know anything about it, is a very, very liberal city, as most of our big cities are, but especially in Wisconsin, Milwaukee is a very liberal city, hence the name. And if you have the pleasure of not living in a big city, that's okay, because a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are challenges to all of us trying to start classical schools. How we're going to move through the material then this morning. I would like to start kind of with the general state of education in Milwaukee. So when I got there almost 5 years ago, what did I see that made me feel like I needed to go down the path of starting a classical school? Then I'll give you a little bit of my individual congregational backgrounds, showing the benefit to the church and the community. And then we'll talk a little bit about how COVID almost ruined everything for probably all of us in various ways, but also gave us really unique opportunities to engage our communities as well. And then some of the challenges that we've had moving forward and how I've tried to overcome those challenges. And once again, the hope is that I'll give you all just enough to be able to tell you, yes, you can start a high school, right? And that you can get through the challenges. There's always ways. The nice thing about being a former Marine is sometimes you go head first and go through the wall, but sometimes you can go around the wall. So there's other ways to figure things out, and hopefully with the support that we have here, we'll be able to figure those things out together and not all alone and unafraid like I've been doing. So any questions before we actually get into the presentation? All right. So introduction, right? Like I said, I'm going to talk about kind of the state of education in Milwaukee. So Milwaukee has the Milwaukee Public School System, and it's one board for all of Milwaukee County. Milwaukee's got 1.7 million people in it. So they have one school board that's elected, and it's a very small board. And they get to make all of the decisions about almost everything. They are fully entrenched in the psychological student model and all of the attending baggage that comes with that. That most of us are here because we don't subscribe to that at all. And in addition to that kind of governance of the public school system, Milwaukee is also very interesting in its own demographics. Sections of the city are very, very poor. We see that in a lot of cities. But if you know anything about the history of the city of Milwaukee, it was designed to keep ethnic groups apart from one another. They designed the highway systems to act as buffers between different ethnic groups. And so it is ethnically diverse, but it's also very segregated within within the city. And like I said, this is built into the very fabric and structure of that city. So when you're trying to talk about giving an education, forming adults, right, as we like to say, there's a lot of difficulty to overcome to try to make a school reflective of that community and give that access to everybody. So there's a lot of those types of things. Also, as in a lot of cities across our country, broken families are rampant in the city itself. If you don't know this, each of the districts have a Lutheran Church Educational Foundation, LCEF, rep that can pull demographic data for you for free, right? Use that resource. But in that demographic data, it'll tell you things like divorce rates, single-family homes, mean income, all of those types of things that are good as you're starting schools to really know what your constituency is and the people that you're actually talking to. Less than a quarter of the families in the city proper of Milwaukee are married. So that means 75% are broken. Different areas are much worse than that. Some of our real inner city areas, it's under 5% married couples. And a lot of fathers in prison, and a lot of moms that don't want dads, even if the father's not in prison and the father's willing to stay there. So there's a lot of great challenges, but also opportunities within the city by virtue of all of those kind of demographics. School performance in Milwaukee is atrocious. Now, you probably can't read this very well, but I'll try to point it out. So this line, this is 8th grade reading, and this is 8th grade math. And these are just proficiency exams from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This up here, this dotted line, is proficient. This dotted line is basic. This is Milwaukee's public school system. Only Baltimore in the entire United States has worse proficiency scores than the city of Milwaukee. So I decided to start a classical high school, right? No one ever said Marines were smart. We had a great line in the Marine Corps. There's a fine line between brave and stupid. Sometimes I think I'm on the wrong side of that line. But this is actually what we're looking at, right? So you can't get out of a cycle of poverty if you are clear down here, right? You're not even meeting the basic requirements. So things are ripe for opportunity, but there are immense challenges and things like that. Another big thing that we've seen within the state of Milwaukee, or the city of Milwaukee, is some of the last testing data. 39 of its schools failed to meet even basic standards for accreditation in schooling. And then, like I said, in a 2013 survey, only Baltimore ranked worse than Milwaukee, where parental choice is allowed. And so that's across the board. That's even the Lutheran and the parochial schools. Only Baltimore was worse than the city of Milwaukee in those things. So the standards are pretty low within our city. Private schools. We've got 53 private high schools in the city of Milwaukee. Sink that in. I'm going to start another one, right? Yeah. These are the things I look at myself in the mirror at night and I go, keep going. I know there's 53 of them, but the 54th is going to be really awesome, so keep going. So 53 private high schools, 18,000 students, and 75%, 3/4 of those are religiously affiliated. For the LCMS, we have 3 LCMS high schools. Milwaukee Lutheran, Martin Lutheran, and Lake Country Lutheran. Milwaukee Lutheran is in the middle of the inner city, and we'll talk about some of these things in a little bit. Martin Luther is in Greenfield, so it's just on the edge of the city of Milwaukee, which gets a kind of a good mix between urban and suburban. And then Lake Country is your affluent suburbs, kind of farther out. And so there's a lot of competition for what I'm doing. And incidentally, I make a lot of people mad by trying to start another school, which is fine because real people have shot at me when I was in the Marine Corps, so verbal shots don't really bother me all that much. In addition to these, we also have 2 Wells high schools in the city and 1 ELCA high school in the city. So that's a lot That's a lot of different Lutheranism going around to deal with and to interact with. Those 3 LCMS schools are managed by what is known as the Lutheran High School Association of Greater Milwaukee, which is a ridiculously long acronym. They couldn't have streamlined that anymore, I guess. And that's Milwaukee Lutheran, Martin Luther, Lake County. And they service about 1,500 students between those 3 high schools. And yet, overall numbers, less than 30% of those 1,500 students are members of LCMS congregations. They get really mad at me when I say that they are about evangelism and I'm about discipleship, because they're like, we do that too. But your numbers don't reflect that, right? Now, I will say that this is a continuum, right? So the inner city school of Milwaukee Lutheran High School, very, very low percent, right? You get out to Lake Country Lutheran and it's over 60%, but still over 60% at a Lutheran high school. Yeah.
So have you thought about, with your high school, what you would like that number to be?
I mean, if I get to pick, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk about how I'm going to try to make that happen, because I'm going to work with these folks so that if someone doesn't meet our particular mission or vision, I'm going to tell them Martin Luther is probably service your family's needs better. Because when you come here, you're going to get these specific things. And we'll talk about why that's important in a little bit. And if I don't fully answer your question, then Aaron, get back to me. So we used to have that old association model, right, where you had to go to church and be a member in good standing, and then you would get a tuition break and your church would help pay some of that. What they did in Milwaukee is those churches became members of this big association. They pay dues into that association, and then the association kind of runs the business aspect of the high schools, right? Many of our confessional Lutheran churches have left the association, and they've left the association because while demographically we have 3 distinct different high schools, theologically and pedagogically, they are all the exact same. They don't do anything different. The chapels are all run the same. The religion classes are all run the same. The psychological student-centered model is all the same in all 3 of those schools. And so, yeah, some of the schools do very good about getting kids into college and those types of things. But as Dr. Preuss talked to us about this morning, right? Like, that's not actually why we exist. We don't exist to give them skills to go get a good job. We exist to teach them the faith, to give them Christ, right? Through the greatness of the Western tradition. And so that's one of the main reasons that when I started talking to people about starting a school, they got really excited, because all of my friends are, confessional Lutherans. So, yeah. So let's talk. Any questions about kind of the state of education in the city of Milwaukee at all?
I just want to make a point about Wisconsin is a choice state.
Sure is.
And so that's really a temptation and a hook for all those Lutheran schools.
Yes.
That they get addicted to the state funding.
Yep.
That lets the state in.
That's exactly right. Now, so I spent 3.5 hours with in Wisconsin. We also have what's known as the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, WIL for short, a much better acronym than that big high school association one, right? I spent 3.5 hours, and they walked, they're lawyers that fight for religious freedom within the state. They walked me through all of the legislation for choice. Now, you cannot discriminate in admittance. But the state, it's written into the legislation, they cannot dictate what you teach. So there are some protections, but as most of us have probably seen, the ability to control what's coming into your school is lessened when you can't discriminate against who comes. So we'll talk about that more in a second, because these are big things that you'll have to wrestle with if you're starting a school. Can I go this route? Should I go this route? Can I go this route and still plan an exit strategy if those types of things. Any other questions or statements on state of education in Wisconsin? All right, so the little parish that I serve, well, one of the little parishes that I serve is Trinity Lutheran Church in West Dallas. They turn 80 this year. They have had a great blessing of longevity of pastors. In 80 years, I am their fourth pastor. So their first one was there for a whopping 6 months. The second was there for 47 years. The third was there for 26 years, and I'm going to hit my fifth in August. So they've had wonderful longevity. Consequently, the dual parish that I serve, the other church, has went through 5 pastors in 15 years. All right, so there's a little bit of a difference in culture between those two. Trinity did have a previous school. Like a lot of our churches, they started an early childhood center, right? And then they were adding grades as those kids got. They had gotten up to about 4th grade. Then it looked like the school was really sucking money from the church. And they voted to close the school after a lot of fighting. And if any of you have been involved in those types of conversations, you know how pugnacious they can get. And about 4 months after the school closed, it actually came out that the treasurer and his wife had been embezzling funds and were making it look like the school was sucking money. So that took that fight and blew it up. Thank God my predecessor dealt with all of that before I got there. I just had to kind of pick up the mess because there were still people 10 years later that were really angry. So we had to deal with that anger and talk about forgiveness and those types of things. And I did so from the pulpit by name. Yeah, well, I told you, fine line between brave and stupid, right? Yeah, it actually worked. Thank God, in spite of me. But this congregation is an older congregation. We'll talk about that in a little bit, like kind of the demographics in here. So some of the challenges that I really had to face was explaining to people what classical Lutheran education was. And really, after talking about this for 4 years, every voters meeting, and I give a school update, I'll still have one person. Pastor, I still don't understand what you're doing. So it doesn't matter how many times you talk about it, but you get better at talking about it. So I give thanks for those opportunities, right, to continue to talk about what we love and what we're trying to do. When I got to the church, demographically, white, lower middle class, most retired. I think our average age is 72. And very few children. This is my beautiful family. They're much older now. This was when I got there, our first Easter together. So we've had actually one more son since then. I'm missing one of my boys. But we quadrupled the number of children just by getting installed. Yeah. Once again, dude, why are you starting a school? I'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get there. And so I was ordained and installed in 2017. Like I said, the school had a previous early childhood center and went all the way through 4th grade. We talked about why the school closed. Those effects are continued to be detrimental in what I'm trying to do. Because every time I talk about starting a school, there are people that cannot separate what happened before with what I'm trying to do now. And so there's a lot of emotion that's involved in that. So it's been a lot of patient teaching and walking and explaining, and then reminding people that we have Matthew 18 for a reason, and don't call each other and complain that your pastor's trying to destroy your church and close your doors, because some of them did that. And so, you know, you just have to keep going when you have that kind of vision of what's going to happen. The response then to starting the school, like I said, average age, 72 years old, no knowledge at all of classical education. As you can imagine, with older congregations, and especially something so very, very new, and then add into all the emotional baggage that was there, it was really hard to get volunteers to help me. And so this all really started by me walking around our building and seeing these empty classrooms and understanding if I don't use them, the building's going to fall apart. And the most heartbreaking one was we had a classroom that's now my classroom. It looked like the teacher had walked out the door, turned off the lights, shut the door, and would be back on Monday to teach again. That was in 2017, and the school closed in 2011. So the only thing, the best analogy is if you've ever lost a child and you keep their room the exact way they left it, right? Because you're holding on to something. That's the level of attachment and hurt that was still there. And so once again, just trying to deal with that. One of the resounding messages that I continued to say was, if I'm the only one that believes that we should do this, we shouldn't do this, right? Now I'm tenacious, so I kept talking that way until I convinced other people that we should do this, and then I got help. But if you're the only one standing alone and you cannot get help, especially if the congregation is going to be fronting the bill, and it becomes very hard to then go to them and say, I need money because we need to start a library, or we need to refix the sanctuary and repaint it and do those types of improvements. I'm happy to say that that's completely changed. It was very, very hard the first couple years, for sure. And so that was kind of their response. It took me about a year to get volunteers to really begin to help me, and I'd gotten so frustrated after asking on my announcements week after week that finally one week I just got exasperated and I said, you make me feel like the little red hen, and I went through the whole story. And I said, if you want to die as a congregation in the next 5 years, then nobody volunteer. And I walked out Marine, right? I had 6 volunteers that day. I don't recommend always taking my approach. Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it really doesn't. But I had 6 volunteers that day because people finally understood what's at stake here, right? What are we actually trying to do? And so that was actually pretty helpful. So how did we then begin? Now I've got people that actually want to do this. I got enough support in the congregation. They vote to continue forward with the planning. And so in 2019, we held 2 town hall meetings in the spring just to simply gauge interest. And to try to get support for these town halls, I sent out letters to every LCMS church and school within a 10-mile radius of Trinity. And in the letter, I told them what I was trying to do. I told them, don't be afraid to talk about it. I don't want to steal your parishioners. I won't entertain transfers or anything like that. But I see a need, and I'm trying to meet that need. And not a single pastor of any church that had a school attached to it said anything to their congregation. Because it didn't matter how many times I said, I have integrity and I won't steal your members. They thought I was going to steal their members, right? And so we get to the town hall, and most of the attendees were homeschool families from congregations that either I had reached out, I had gotten on all the Facebook LCMS homeschool pages and blasted out to everybody, if you're in this area, come see us, let's talk. And at that point in time, I had no expectation of what grade level or phase level to start with. It was just, can we simply talk about this, right? And we had several families come, and at the end of our second town hall, we had 20 students that were interested, which blew me away, because I was like, if I get 5, I'll be really happy, right? So we had 20 students interested, and the grade level was middle school ages with a homeschool resource, so that those families that do appreciate and want that time with their younger kids can have it. And I was going to build the resource center so that we could all worship together in the morning, and then be there to help teach Latin or any of the classes I could help teach that maybe a parent struggled with, offer those things. And so that was really exciting. We're moving along. We were looking at opening in fall of 2021 originally, and then this. So the original plan, middle school, fall of 2021, I was going to add grades as those middle schoolers graduated. And so we would be adding on the high school grades as that happened, and then back planning the younger grades if the interest from the families was there. And you all know it. I'm speaking to people that know these things. When you start older, families realize very quickly the foundation that actually needs to be set to give a true classical education to those older kids. So we're already working on those things, and I'll talk about that. So Milwaukee County, being a very liberal county, closed everything. Milwaukee Public Schools, with those test scores that I showed you before, did not have in-person education for almost 2.5 years, right? So now we have kids in high school that have very low elementary level capabilities in math and reading. Mask mandates, vaccine mandates, all of those things forced all the parents to have to make some really tough decisions. And as you can imagine, homeschool families instantaneously said, you know what, this is not worth it. we are not going to send our kids to any school right now because this is nuts. And I begged them. I was the only church in Milwaukee County that refused to close. I got chewed out by the health inspector for 45 minutes on Holy Saturday because they found out I was doing Easter services. I thought I was going to get arrested on Easter Sunday of 2020. And I told them, I won't close, right? I don't care what the city does. They didn't believe me, and they pulled everything. So that then kind of caused me to really take a hard internal look, a lot of prayer, a lot of time at the altar, trying to figure out if God actually still wanted me to move on and to start a school. Because that losing all of those students after the excitement that we had was kind of a big setback for us. So that left me to ask the question, what now? Well, I reached out to the CCLE. And fortunately, Reverend Keyser called me and we talked. So we reevaluated the whole thing. I really wish I would have known about Project Genesis when I was planning this for the first 2 years by myself, because it would have saved me a lot of time and effort, and I would have had people that knew what they were doing. I was a Marine and now a pastor. I don't know how to open a school, right? But people do. And so that relationship started very, very well. I knew a lot about CCLE because Dr. Nordling told me my very first year at seminary, you need to go be involved in this, Brandon. And I said, yes, sir, because I say that to Dr. Nordling. And I started going to the conferences when they're on the seminary. So that's how I began to learn, and that's why I went the CCLE route. So the seeds that we're planting now at these conferences can bear fruit 10 years down the road, and we don't even know. So we went through Project Genesis with Reverend Keyser. We're kind of uniquely located in Milwaukee, where I have CUW and CUC. We're kind of equidistant between the two, and both have classical educator training programs. So I had 4 students that sat on our steering committee. And I thought, selfishly, I got to hire teachers at some point. And if I have relationships with these students, they might want to come work with me. And unselfishly, if they don't want to come work with me, because I can be a little much, then they've got the experience of how to start a school. And if they can't find a job, then they can go start one. And so that was kind of my goal with involving those students. And we're already in talks with both universities about using students for student teaching and things like that to really try to bolster those programs and give the students an opportunity that they wouldn't normally have. So we formed the steering committee. Because of COVID, it took us about a year to go through the whole process, which it can get done in about 6 months if you have the ability to have a lot of in-person meetings, which we didn't. But we went through it. We did the feasibility study. Reverend Keyser and I put together a plan in conjunction with the steering committee, and things just kind of took off after that. Throughout that feasibility study, when we did the individual interviews, so if you know anything about the Genesis Project, one of the things that you do after you build kind of your case statement and do all of the paperwork is you interview people. And I wore Pastor Keyser out. I think I scheduled like 24 interviews in 2 days for him, and each interview is like an hour long. Yeah. Well, if I was going to pay to drive or fly him up, I was going to get my money's worth. So, hey, new school start, small budget, right? Good steward. Maybe not of his mental energy, but everything else. So we tried to be very deliberate. Prospective parents, other administrators and educators and teachers from the grade schools around. We pulled in people from the public schools. We pulled someone from the mayor's office of the city. We tried to get as wide as we could to get as much input as we could to make the best plan that was possible. So we had a very, very good plan going forward. And within that, then we really began to change focus on the high school. And we'll talk in a little bit, actually the next slide, I think, why a classical Lutheran high school. So most of you know with homeschool families, there's 2 natural breaks. One going into middle school where the parents are like, you know what, I may not be able to teach all of this stuff. And then one going into high school. And so when we were looking at those 2 natural breaks, that was why we started with the middle school first, because I thought if I get them in middle school and then we add the high school, now I can actually give them some substance, especially if those families have been classically homeschooling at the younger ages. And so that's what we went with. Also, that big association, it's been around for 120 years, the high school association. So they have experience managing the money side, the advertising side. They have their own facilities department, their own advertising department. These are all paid employees already of the association. And like I said, I don't know how to start or manage. I can barely teach. So, it's going to be great. So I wanted to pull from the high school association's expertise in some of these things. Now, that can be dicey, right? The association has got 3 cookie-cutter schools. So when I went in and met with them, me being the Marine I am, I looked at them because they reached out to me. And I said, well, why should I work with you? Why should I work with you when you've done the same thing to 3 schools? Why should I work with you when all of the confessional churches have left your association and you've done nothing to fix it? And they gave me a really good answer. We don't need another school doing the same things that we are doing, but we've really struggled trying to figure out how to re-engage those things and actually show that we do care about doctrine, which they could be really good salespeople, and they probably are. So I said, okay, well, let's talk. So we've been talking for 18 months. The goal is to become the 4th high school if the agreement is in paper, notarized, and looked at by my lawyers that allows me to have full autonomy of hiring and firing of teachers, full autonomy of curriculum development and implementation, and full autonomy of the day-to-day running of the school, and the school has to be, in writing, always attached to the church. If I get those things, then they can worry about the money. And now that solves for me, the little itty-bitty congregation that can't afford to do it on its own. I've got a safety net. But I got to make sure the safety net doesn't have any of the holes in it that may come. So once again, walking on that knife edge, right? Trying to figure those things out. Another reason that we went with the high school is it's non-confrontational to the other churches with schools. They'll talk about a high school all day long because they actually understand that we need it. And so I've had huge response. All of those churches that didn't say anything to their members when we were doing the open houses in 2019 have all invited me now to come and teach Bible study and preach and meet with their PTA and meet with their leadership and talk about what we're doing and why it's important to do it. Another reason to go with the high school is it fits our space well. We've got 6 classrooms at Trinity. And so that kind of lends itself. We were going to outgrow it probably pretty quickly. Beautiful thing about now having a dual point parish 1.1 miles away is now I just inherited 15 classrooms. So now we're instantaneously, I just had a architect. If you're ever doing this and you're trying to use an existing building, before you go to a city for zoning or permitting, pay the money and have a good architect walk through your building and help build your plan, because they know all of the language to use. It was $750 to have the architect walk through Trinity, and the city, which I had heard horror stories about, killing projects, especially schools, they didn't even come and look at ours. They just said, okay, cool, here's your permit. Your open hearing's on this day. As long as no one comes and votes against it, you're good to go. Oh, by the way, fix the fence that's falling over in the back from the snowplows. That was it. Didn't even come in. We were deathly afraid that we were going to have to put in an elevator and a sprinkler system and all of those things, and we didn't. So, investment of money to look at existing buildings. So I just had that same architect walk through the second building to then build this plan. It's a different city, West Dallas and Milwaukee. But he knows all of those things. So we're immediately planning the younger grades right now, because I've already had parents asking me, how can we prep these kids to do that? And I'll talk about how simple things that I'm doing to help prep students that may not have the background also. Let me see. Challenges. There's not one purely classical school at all in Milwaukee. There are 3 that claim to be classical, but as most of us know, they don't follow true classical education. They pick and choose the things that they kind of want and fits them, and then they call themselves classical. And so it's really more of a hybrid. That's a challenge, also an opportunity. It's a challenge because when I say classical, people that are familiar with those schools think they know what I'm talking about when they actually really, really don't. And so it's a lot of explanation. It's a lot of elevator speeches and things like that to try to bring these out. 41 LCMS grade schools and 3 high schools within a 25-mile radius. That's a lot of schools. And so, once again, clear mission and vision, being unabashed about who you are and where you want your students to be when they graduate from you. That's different. I found that a lot of the other schools will have these beautiful platitudes, but there's no concreteness. They're all abstract, right? And so when you talk about abstract things, then you can kind of fit anybody in that Play-Doh machine. Whereas I like Play-Doh's a great analogy, right? Because it doesn't matter what the shape is going in or the color, you push it all through and it's the same shape coming out. And usually an ugly brown or speckled or something like that. So we try to not be that. We try to really focus on who we are and what we're attempting to give the students. This gives us a lot of pushback, though, with all of the other Lutheran schools. The fiery darts come pretty continually. I gave a 10-minute talk at our district convention, and instantaneously, by the time I got off the stage, the high school association was already fielding calls from delegates complaining that I was trashing the schools when they actually didn't listen to me because they're not classically educated, so they can't actually hold information in their heads and see a general progression. And so there is a lot of that. And everything that I've read and everybody I've talked to that's ever tried to start a school from scratch, they all experience this because this is countercultural, what we're doing. And that's good, and that's wonderful, and that's biblical. Fundraising is always a challenge, right? Fundraising for financing a curriculum. I talk about, just as in our divine service, we have 2 centers, the service of the word, culminating in the reading of the gospel, the knowledge that we get of Christ, and the divine service, where we actually get Christ physically given to us. I compare that by analogy to the library, where we get knowledge, and the sanctuary, where we literally get Christ. And so those are the 2 focal points. My classrooms may not be the best, but I'm going to have a really good library, and I'm going to have a really beautiful sanctuary. Those are the 2 things that are my big topics for fundraising. Branding and advertising can also be difficult if you're starting up. If you need resources for how to brand, that seal that was up a bit ago, that was me sketching on a paper, and I sent it to a real artist who did a very nice job. And then we got all the rights, and it was like $175. And I got the vector images that you can blow up and shrink down, and they don't change or distort. Any background color, all of that stuff. It was $175, right? And now I can brand everything. So those things you do need to think about pretty soon. And then obviously hiring teachers is difficult. You all know this, right? It's hard enough finding good Lutheran teachers. It's really hard to find good Lutheran classical teachers. It's darn near impossible to find good Lutheran classical teachers that can teach the things that I can't teach. So if you're a math, science, music, pretty much anything that's not humanities related, come talk to me if you need a job. How we're overcoming challenges. Like I said, formulate your identity early. Be very specific about it. Be clear on your mission and vision. Show how you're different. Show why you're different. That why question is something you will answer over and over and over again. Then be visible, get out into the public. What I do, teaching and preaching at churches, one of the things that I'm trying to do to help the community understand what we're doing is I'm teaching enrichment classes through the Parks and Rec department. If you don't know that, most Parks and Rec departments offer enrichment classes, painting, music, things like that. So I'm teaching Pride and Prejudice this fall. But I'm also offering an Intro to Latin class so that when I go around and talk to students, and the parents freak out. They're going into high school, and you've got some kids with Latin and some kids that don't. I can say, just take it through with me through the Parks and Rec department over the year, 2 days a week for the whole year, and I'll have them caught up by the time. And then I'm also running a Latin boot camp next summer right before we open, right, to give as much as we can, patterned after Dr. Nordling's Greek class and the intensity there. It'll be great. So teaching community enrichment classes, and then any speaking engagements. So this guy that I'm standing next to is Kevin Nicholson. Kevin and I served in the Marine Corps together, and just 2 days ago, he had just dropped out of the governor's race for Wisconsin, which really stinks because Kevin's a wonderful man. He gets me involved and on dockets when he goes and speaks. He gives me commercials. When he's talking about the dangers of CRT and he's anywhere near the city of Milwaukee, Kevin will say, you got schools starting like Trinity Lutheran Classical High School that are directly going against these types of things that we are seeing. I've gotten to go and follow him and give a talk. Also, when I did that talk, there was a reporter from the Journal Sentinel, which is a very liberal newspaper, but that reporter contacted me and wanted to do a story on the school. And so after thorough research, making sure that this man would give me a fair shake, and he did a story on us. Full page story in the newspaper. We had an 800% increase on our website traffic the next day. All right, so little things like that just get out there. In other words, always carry stickers and business cards, and everybody you talk to, so as a pastor, everybody I talk to, I tell that I'm a pastor and a headmaster. I invite them to church, and I invite them to check out the school. Everybody I talk to. I go to a Brewers games. I have a stack of cards that I hand out. I go to the grocery store. I have a stack of cards that I hand out. Start the conversation with as many people as you can, as much as you can, and it'll do two things. One, you're planting all those seeds that will come back. And two, every time you do it, you're learning how to do it better, right? Rhetorically, you get to learn to read people better. You get to anticipate just by watching their facial expressions if there's confusion. So you get better at doing it. And the goal then is to be able to, be a Chrysostom of classical education and be able to spout a few words and convert people, right? Continuing to overcome challenges, work with your district. We got great support for our district office. We were actually just able to hire another pastor so that I could step over and headmaster because the district has pledged me $35,000 a year for the next 3 years. And so I was able to take part of what I was getting paid from the church and get it over to this new pastor and backfill that with mine so that, my kids can still eat. Once again, the relationship with the high school association, I do think that us as Lutherans have a tendency to be polemical and then separate. Figure out if you can. Don't force it, but figure out if you can work with those within those other groups. If you can, the mutual support will be beneficial. If you can't, then at least you know, right? Then you're not left wondering. Another group that I've come to kind of late is called the Drexel Group. The Drexel Group, you can use some of their stuff. They're a group that's all throughout the country that specializes in school starts for underserved populations. Because of the demographics of Milwaukee, they asked me to be part of their group. I've done it nominally because, once again, they do have a lot of the psychological model, skills-based, all of those types of stuff. But they also do have funds, and they also do run things like, how do you create a board when you're starting a school, right? What skill sets are you looking for so that you have a successful board? How do you begin to talk to people about this? How do you begin to advertise? What should you be looking for in branding? And a lot of those things I don't know about, and so I've used them in their training to do that. And like I said before, a relationship with Concordia, Wisconsin and Concordia, Chicago, and then partnering with LCMS grade schools. As a high school, you want to identify pretty quickly feeder schools, right? Can you flip other schools to be classical? If you show them that you're starting a high school, and now there's something to build upon what you as a grade school could give them, it's a lot easier to be able to flip pedagogically an existing grade school than starting from scratch. We're actually working on with a couple grade schools in the Milwaukee area to possibly do that. And they're far enough away that it won't change what we're trying to do with starting our full K through 12. But having 3 or 4 feeder schools will sustain us, and that'll be great. Questions? That's it, I think.
When are you open now? Or
Fall of 2023. Yep. So I have a little over a year to get. So what we're doing now is finalizing parent handbook, faculty handbook. I've got most of the handouts and stuff like that I've already worked through to be able to give out. But now it's just me getting around to those other congregations and schools, getting in front of people and getting the parents and the students to understand and buy in.
Are you starting just 9th grade?
9th and 10th. Yep. So we're going to follow a little bit more of a cohort model to begin with, and then kind of see, you know, in the Marine Corps, we talked a lot about plan, but don't fall in love with the plan. So plan for everything, but as soon as the bullets start coming, you may have to adjust. So we're going to start with that because it gives me the greatest flexibility, I think, to be able to manage the classroom with a smaller staff. Yeah, but then we'll figure out where to go from there. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I would encourage you to reach outside of Milwaukee County and
Sure.
outside of those LCMS schools. I'm at Peace Lutheran Academy in Sussex, and
Your new pastor and my new pastor are best friends, and we're getting together like next week. So yeah, yeah.
we have people that drive a long distance.
Yes, you do. Yeah, we've already talked about actually buying a van so that we can help with the back and forth, getting kids from Milwaukee to you guys and high school students back to us before they can drive. Yeah.
Right, which really shouldn't be a problem.
I don't think it would be. No, Pastor Bender and I are very close. In fact, we all, until I got the call to Trinity, we were coming to Peace. That's where my kids were going to go to school. Yep. Yeah. But once we got the call, it became not very feasible. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you find it challenging as far as extracurricular?
Yeah. So the question was challenging for extracurriculars. Yes, but this is where the relationship with the high school association will be great. Martin Luther High School is 10 minutes away from us. We are not big enough to drop them or make them go up a division in state sports and stuff like that. So if the kids want to do sports, they can go participate over there. And so that's the game plan right now. If that doesn't work out, then I'm going to offer extracurriculars that support what we do, right? And sports, there's so many other sports things outside of school that kids can do in and around the city for us. We just have an abundance of those types of things. And so we'll work with parents on that stuff.
Are those, is it still that core 20 kids, those homeschool families that
Not one of them.
not one?
No, they're excited about when we get the high school going in 5 years when their kids get that old, but not one of them right now. Yep. I'm still in contact with all of them. You have to develop and keep those relationships. Absolutely. So I still talk to them. We get together regularly so that they don't forget me. But yeah, none of them right now.
And the teacher, the Lutheran classical teacher,
Yeah.
how are you addressing that issue?
Advertising, talking to everybody, once again, talking to everybody all the time.
Are you doing stuff at the Synods-wise?
Yeah. Yeah, so we had this set up at the district convention. I'm going to be a delegate to the synodical convention next year, so we'll have a booth there that we'll talk to people about.
University system?
The university
Are we
systems.
working with them?
Yep.
Bring up more
Yes.
classical teachers?
Yes. And that's why we exist, right? We want to do this to promote church vocations, right? So we're very much building younger what Luther Classical College is trying to do. Christian Preuss is my son's godfather, so we're all in cahoots.
Give it around.